Chapter 7. The End. After such a stressful night, it was almost a relief to drive into the parking lot of the school. Today was the last day I would see her, the last day of what I could call my life. But she would live a much longer, much happier life without me. Any pain I suffered would be easy payment if she could live the human life she deserved. Her truck pulled up, and I couldn't stifle my first reaction. I smiled at the thought of her arrival, anticipating the first wisps of her scent, the electricity of her touch. Quickly I looked down before she could see. I'd succeeded in separating myself from her over these last days. I couldn't indulge in these thoughts, not today. I prepared for the onslaught of my senses as she parked. When I looked up, my eyes were empty again. Bella came around my car, her face drawn. She could feel the coming change, I could tell, but she was fighting. Part of me wanted her to resist, to keep me from leaving, but I carefully locked those selfish thoughts away. She deserved better than me. "Good morning," Bella said, without feeling. As I lifted her backpack off her shoulder, I put my other hand in my pocket, preventing her from wrapping her fragile fingers around mine. My throat began to burn intensely. My time away from Bella had weakened the resistance I'd built up against her delectable fragrance. Memories of that first fateful day filled my mind, but amazingly, the monster remained in check. I swallowed and nodded, not quite meeting her stare. She sighed, and we walked to class. Her face was filled with a new determination today, and though I tried to ignore the set of her eyes, I couldn't. I sneaked peeks all during class, looking for clues to what she could be thinking. I justified my curiosity as preparation for what was coming after school. Even now, as we sat in class, I could see the wheels in her head turning, trying to understand what was happening. She was trying to read my mind as hard as I'd tried to read hers. The silence between us continued, and I regretted that I couldn't hear her voice more on this last day. Every second with her was agony, knowing that there were so few left, but also ecstasy, since I deserved none of them. Finally, I walked her to her last class, one we didn't share. "Will I see you after school?" she asked, and I hated the fear I caused in her eyes. She should fear me, I reminded myself. "Sure," I said nonchalantly. She frowned and turned, entering the building. I sighed as she disappeared. The rest of the afternoon would be filled with the two tasks I dreaded most: collecting any evidence of my presence in Bella's life, and saying goodbye. Class started all through the school, but I headed into the forest. Without thinking, I automatically made my way to Bella's house. Even though it was a nice day for a run, the trip brought me no joy. Nothing would bring me happiness again. Not without her. My throat tightened as I approached her house. I reached for the key under the eave, rather than heading to her window. There were too many memories that surfaced at the sight of that simple pane of glass, and I couldn't afford to dwell on them now. Quickly I ran up the stairs. The faster I get this done and get back, the better, I thought. But I couldn't help but stop as I entered her room for the last time. It felt like it had been so long since I'd been here, even though it was only a couple of days. I almost expected things to be different somehow, but they weren't. Everything was exactly the same, and it hurt all the more. Get to work, I told myself. There was only one reason I was here: to erase myself from her life. The fewer reminders she had of me, the better. Perhaps there was some wisdom in Bella's insistence that I didn't give her any gifts. There was little of me here to collect. There were her birthday presents. I easily located the tickets and removed the CD from her player. For a moment, I struggled with the idea of removing the radio from her truck, but discounted that idea. It wasn't from me, after all, and leaving a gaping hole in her dashboard would cause more problems than it would solve. The same was true of the clothes that filled her closet, courtesy of Alice. It was only my existence that needed to be removed, so she wouldn't follow after me. She wouldn't chase after the others. I looked around again and spotted her photo album on the floor, the picture she took yesterday. I took a deep breath and tried not to think about the bed I sat on, about the nights spent here, holding her. Don't. Gingerly, I picked up the book, opened it, and was greeted with the first photo she'd taken. I stared at the picture, not recognizing the face, my face, smiling up at me. It was before, when I was still innocently happy. I snatched the photo and turned the page. As I studied the photos from school, I found myself in the background of most of them. So I decided to remove them all. She could easily take new ones. Then I turned to the last page. My silly Bella. I couldn't stop the thought as I stared at the folded photo. Again, I was confronted with my own image, recognizing this dead face. I pulled the photo out and turned it over, revealing her. This is the side that mattered, I thought. Briefly, I ran my finger over the image, wishing that there could possibly be some way I could stay. For a second, I considered taking the picture with me. But as much as I was taking myself out of her life, I needed to keep her out of mine. Reminders like this would just tempt me to return. Only her writing was left on the pages, my name inked below an empty frame. I couldn't erase it, and though I considered blacking out the words, I chose not to. This one thing I would leave. It was selfish, but she would probably tear the page out herself. I set the empty book back down on the floor and prepared to go. I collected the items I was taking and looked around one last time, picking up the negatives that were sitting on her desk. There was nothing else I had to find, to take. What would I do with these reminders? I couldn't dispose of them. They still belonged to Bella, regardless. And I couldn't take them with me. As I stood, the floor creaked under my weight, and I looked down. The loose floorboard came up easily, revealing a small space between the joists. Somehow, the thought of leaving these memories behind, so close to her, comforted me. She would never know, but I would. One last selfishness. As the board slipped back into place, I realized that my heart was being sealed into the tiny space as well. I would never be whole again. I stood, took one more look, and ran out of the house. Goodbye, I thought, and steeled myself for the end. Classes were nearly over, and I decided to sit in my car and wait out the final minutes in the parking lot. I flipped open the glove box and perused the CDs there. One by one, I took them out slowly, reading each word on the paper inserts. None of them piqued my interest, but by being so deliberate, I managed to pass the few minutes until the bell rang. Only a few moments remained of my time with her, so I went to meet her as she exited her class. Forcing my eyes ahead, we walked to her truck. I couldn't help but steal a glance at her as we walked, and I could see resolve forming on her face. She was preparing to fight. How I loved her. But I had to stop this. "Do you mind if I come over today?" I asked, trying to stay detached. Her look became startled. "Of course not. Now?" I asked too quickly, as I opened the door of her truck. Bella became wary. "Sure. I was just going to drop a letter for Renee in the mailbox on the way. I'll meet you there." I glanced at the envelope on the seat, stuffed so full it was barely sealed. She'd had double prints made. In a flash, I grabbed the letter. "I'll do it, and I'll still beat you there." I managed a smile, but she didn't return it. "Okay," she said, and I closed the door for her. The letter was heavy in my hand, as I walked to my car without looking back. I would have to be fast to get this safely locked away with the other memories before she arrived. Thankfully, the parking lot was jammed behind me, and I raced to her house. There was little time, so I did what I couldn't do before and leapt through her window. I carefully opened the envelope and removed the photos, quickly placing them under the floor. The flap of the envelope now invited me. It had opened easily enough. Bella hadn't sealed it well, and all I had to do was relick the glue. I closed my eyes as I lifted the flap to my lips. This would be the last taste, and I let my tongue drift over the paper. In this one moment, I remembered her kiss, but the flavor was so strong, it brought back much more. My mind filled with the taste of her. That one terrible taste I'd had in Phoenix as she lay torn between death and transformation. The euphoria her blood had brought me, and the monster that it called to returned in a flash. I am that monster, and that is why I must leave. Time was nearly up. Bella would be arriving soon. I finished sealing the letter and the floor, and didn't bother looking back this time. Slipping into my car, I hid the letter under my traveling bag in the passenger seat and turned on the radio. I covered my eyes with my hand, trying to focus on what had to happen in these last minutes. Bella was no fool. It was obvious that she was worried that something was seriously wrong, but my true intentions appeared to remain a mystery to her. It was clear that she would resist me. She wouldn't understand that this was the right way, the only way, to keep her safe. She would be hurt by my words, and the thought of her sadness was like a knife in my heart. How would I do this? Where would I do this? In all my trepidation, I hadn't considered where we'd be standing when I made that final break. I'd assumed it would be here at her house, but as I envisioned standing on her porch, in her kitchen, by her truck, nothing felt right. How could I taint the places she lived with such a despicable memory? I wanted to remove any reminders of me, not leave an indelible stain that she would have to pass every day. My eyes drifted up, across the lawn, and to the crack of trail that broke the edge of the trees. Bella hadn't traveled that way since I'd warned her about the dangers in the forest months ago, and it held no positive memories for her, as far as I knew. That was the spot then, just at the head of the trail. Perhaps my goodbye would discourage her from ever treading that path again, keeping her just a little further away from the dangers lurking in the woods. I reached down and turned off the radio. The music had been no help, only serving to remind me of what I was about to give up. I realized that my one refuge would no longer hold any peace for me. The ache in my chest intensified, but what I felt didn't matter. Only she mattered, her safety. I tried to breathe as I heard her truck approach. Bella looked uneasy, parking at the curb. As I moved to meet her, I couldn't help but take in every detail of this last encounter. How her hair moved around her as she turned toward me, the shape of her body, the smoothness of her skin, the warmth of her deep brown eyes. Everything was burned into my memory, forever. Her scent drifted toward me, and the fire in my throat warmed. For once, I didn't try to push the bloodlust away. I embraced it, remembering the creature I am, why I was here, what I had to do. This monster, and all others like it, had to be removed from Bella's life for good. This image was what I kept before me as I reached toward the love of my existence. As I took Bella's bag from her, she relaxed for a second. When I reached around her and placed it back into the truck, the tension returned. She was so observant, so smart, so beautiful. No, don't. I chastised myself. This was going to be difficult enough without indulging in my own feelings. I am a monster, and she would die if I stayed. Come for a walk with me, I said, suddenly remembering that first day when the bloodlust had nearly won. Sitting in that classroom, my thirst raging as it never had, I'd thought of 1,000 ways to kill Bella. Taking her into the woods was one of the first options I'd come up with. How ironic that this would be the way I would be ending my own life, the brief flicker of life I'd found with her. The heat from her hand wrapped itself around mine as I led her to the trees. Her heart was beating fast, matching the pace of her breathing. I recognized the reaction from long ago, the flight reflex. Even she could see the demon next to her. A fissure began to slowly form in the center of my chest as we slowed, entering the cover of the foliage. I stopped, within easy sight of the house, and dropped her hand. breaking yet another connection between us. Bella frowned nervously as I gazed at her, diverting my attention momentarily. The words I'd planned to say ran through my mind. "Okay, let's talk," she said strongly. She had no idea what I was about to do to her. Inhaling, I started. "Bella, we're leaving." She took a breath too, but her expression relaxed and my heart sank. This was going to be exceptionally difficult. "Why now? Another year," she started. "Bella, it's time. How much longer could we stay in Forks, after all? Carlisle can barely pass for 30, and he's claiming 33 now. We'd have to start over soon, regardless." I studied her expression as her brow furrowed in thought. It was as if I was speaking to her in Greek. Understanding eluded her. I stared down at her, waiting for her mind to grasp what I was saying, waiting for her to realize how I was about to hurt her. Her eyes changed, and her face paled. My stone heart writhed in pain. "When you say we," she whispered, and paused. "No, don't do it. There has to be a better way," my heart screamed, but I would not be swayed. "I mean my family and myself," I said mechanically. "Not you." She shook her head, displaying the argument I was expecting. Bella didn't speak as my words slowly penetrated her being. Surprisingly, her expression transformed to relief. "Okay, I'll come with you." And the argument began. With every word, part of me longed to stay, or to take her away, to somehow be with her, just the two of us. But it was my proximity that had put her in so much danger, nearly killing her. How many times was it now? No matter where she was, I had to be somewhere else. "You can't, Bella. Where we're going, where I'm going. It's not the right place for you." "Where you are is the right place for me," she said stubbornly. How could I get her to see, to let me go? "I'm no good for you, Bella," I said firmly. "Don't be ridiculous. You're the very best part of my life." "No, that's wrong. She is the best part. She is all of my life." Always she saw things backwards. Something stirred in the back of my mind, something black and deceitful. "My world is not for you, and never would be, no matter what Alice saw." "What happened with Jasper? That was nothing, Edward, nothing." "You're right." Finally she saw something for what it was. It was exactly what was to be expected. And it would happen again, the next time her blood was spilled in front of me. I cringed at the thought of my lips at her throat, unable to stop myself when she was injured again. Bella didn't give up, her blushing anger more enticing than her argument. "You promised! In Phoenix you promised that you would stay." "As long as that was best for you." But my presence had only brought her more tribulation, more pain. She winced as she waved her injured arm in frustration. "No! This is about my soul, isn't it?" she yelled. "Carlisle told me about that, and I don't care, Edward. I don't care. You can have my soul. I don't want it without you. It's yours already," she shouted. I ripped my eyes from hers, tilting my head down but seeing nothing. How wrong she was. I could never take her soul, destroy such a beautiful, perfect spirit. If I could give her mine in return, maybe. But mine had long since made its way to hell. There was no way I would allow her to join me there, no matter how much she begged. That would be worse than watching her die. Again, her logic was the reverse of what it should be. She would sacrifice her most precious possession for me, to the one creature with absolutely nothing to give in return. If she could only see things the way they truly are. But no. What if I twisted my argument to match her logic? The blackness in my mind took form, becoming the one lie that would be impossible to sell, even to one as gullible as Bella. "I'm no good for you, Bella," I'd said, but she couldn't accept that fact. The reverse was agony for me to even think. "You're no good for me." But how could she possibly believe it? She'd witnessed the rebirth of my being, transforming from a solitary existence into one where I spent every moment possible with her. The evidence was not just emotional, but physical. Esme, Carlyle, even Rosalie had commented on my appearance, the light that Bella instilled in my features. No, she would reject this lie before it left my lips. But what choice did I have? Arguing with her until she became so exhausted that she fell asleep? The thought of seeing her peaceful, trusting eyes closed again made my arms ache to hold her. Just hearing her furious voice, her shouts, was nearly more than I could take. It'd been days since she'd said so much to me. But I had to go. She had to be free to live. Somehow I had to convince Bella I didn't love her. She saw through everything with her superhuman perception. How could I sell such a lie? But if she saw it in reverse, could she finally understand that I was wrong for her, that she deserved so much more? What would I do if it didn't work? I stared at the ground, taking every feeling, every truth that Bella had instilled in me, and locked it away. The hole in my chest ripped open wide, and I let everything that she'd given me disappear into it, finding that nothing remained. I was gone. Everything that was Edward Cullen disappeared with her. All that was left was the cursed stone shell I wore. It was with empty eyes I looked up at her and spoke the heinous words, the greatest lie. Bella. Her name pierced me. I don't want you to come with me. I looked at her face, but didn't see her eyes. I couldn't bear to witness the anger that must be there. She didn't move, though, and stood staring up at me blankly. Her brow creased, as if trying to make sense of such a simple statement. She must be choosing her next argument. She knows that I live for her. How many times had I confessed my love to her in these past months? We spent hardly an hour apart. I hadn't been more than a few minutes away from her since returning from Phoenix. How can I convince her that all my actions had been meaningless, when in truth they were the first worthwhile things I had in my life? Her lips began to move. You don't want me? Her voice was confused, and that shocked me. No, was all I could say. I continued to peer at her, not blinking, keeping all my thoughts hidden. She had to see through this lie. How could she believe such a myth? Her expression changed only slightly, but not to the angry disbelief I was expecting. Well, that changes things, she said evenly. My heart, hidden away from her, ripped in two, and I had to look away. Bella did believe me, and that hurt so much more. How easily she accepted the lie that I could just throw her love away. It was as if she was leaving me now. The argument I'd planned to make shifted slightly in my mind, and a different version of the same words began flowing out of my mouth. I've let this go on much too long, and I'm sorry for that, I ended, actually incorporating a small piece of the truth. I was a shameless liar, and I stared at her heartlessly. Don't, she whispered. Don't do this. Each word speared me. No, don't do this, my heart screamed in agreement. I pushed the words away. She had to live. You're not good for me, Bella. I lied again. Her face fell, completely embracing the words. How can you believe me? Without you, I'm nothing. There has never been anything as good for me as you, my love. She must live, I argued silently. She struggled again with her words, starting to speak, but then paused. I waited, barely enduring the torture. Her thoughts would forever remain a mystery to me, and the pain of that realization nearly broke my will. If that's what you want, she said softly. What I want doesn't matter. She must live. I could only nod in agreement. The pain was too much. Her demeanor changed again, becoming distant. Her hands swayed at her sides, and fear rushed through me at the thought she may faint. There was only one thing more, then I would go. I would like to ask one favor, though, if that's not too much. Her face softened for a moment, and I could see that she would do anything for me, that she cared that much. Every cell in my body begged me one last time to stop. to wrap my arms around Bella and never let her go. It is all a lie. My chest began to ache, and I had to fight for every breath, carefully concealing the truth from my one and only love. "Anything," she said, and a hint of strength lay behind the word. I couldn't hide my feelings as I made my last request of her. I gazed deeply into her eyes, willing her to know how much I loved her, how important she was to me. Lost in her perfect chestnut pools, I had to remind myself to speak. "Don't do anything reckless or stupid. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I commanded. She nodded weakly, and I knew she understood. Carefully, I tried to lock away all the love, all the concern, my whole life, hiding it from her again. Pushing it all away, for without her I was nothing. But she will live. I reinforced the lie. "I'm thinking of Charlie, of course. He needs you. Take care of yourself. For him. And for me." "I will," she breathed, nodding her head again. At least she didn't argue this one point. I owed her my own oath, though it rang hollow, mixed in with all the lies. "And I'll make you a promise in return. I promise that this will be the last time you'll see me. I won't come back. I won't put you through anything like this again. You can go on with your life without any more interference from me. It will be as if I never existed." As I spoke the words, I tried to brand them into my heart. She deserved nothing less from me. Bella teetered before me. Again I feared she would faint. If I had to carry her to the house, I didn't think my will would hold. My words were gentle, soothing, at least to her. "Don't worry, you're human. Your memory is no more than a sieve. Time heals all wounds for your kind, but not for me." As if she read my mind, she said, "And your memories?" Well, how I wanted to tell her that I would remember every intimate detail of her. Her smell, her touch, every single word she'd ever spoken to me, every look, every smile, every tear. Even her unbelievably delicious taste was etched into my memory permanently, never leaving me, always there to haunt me until the end of my days. I couldn't even lie to her. She would see through me in a second. I won't forget, but my kind were very easily distracted. I tried to smile, to convince her and myself that it was true. At the moment, I couldn't see how I could possibly avoid thinking of her, of this moment. "Victoria," my mind whispered, but the name faded away on the breeze. Bella believed me, believed the outrageous lie, and this was the end. It was finally time to leave. If I stayed any longer, I wouldn't ever go. I stepped back, my chest empty but for the pain. A pain I would live with until the end of my existence. "That's everything, I suppose. We won't bother you again." As I prepared to turn away, her expression changed to surprise, and it caught me off guard for a second. "Alice isn't coming back." It seemed I must continue to torture her, and myself. "No, they're all gone. I stayed behind to tell you goodbye." Her face was vacant now, completely empty, just like my spirit. "Alice is gone?" She wanted to say goodbye, but I convinced her that a clean break would be better for you. I struggled to keep Alice's visions of me and Bella happily together from intruding on my mind. That future would disappear now. Bella was swaying again, her face white, her eyes empty. She took a breath. How I wanted to hold her. "It is time. Let her live." "Goodbye, Bella," I said softly, taking one last, long look at her beautiful face. Before I could move, she stepped toward me. "Wait," she croaked, and her hands came up to me. I trapped her arms, carefully preventing her from reaching out to me, but before I could stop myself, I bent down, foolishly touching my lips to her forehead. The electricity I felt whenever I touched her skin had not diminished in these last torturous days, and it flashed through me like lightning in that half second of contact. I savored the warmth, the smell, the feeling of her pulse in my hands and under my lips, and for one more second, the sound of her heart. My senses were full of her, and my heart tried again. Don't do it. Stay with her, forever. She needs you. She loves you. Fighting every instinct I had, I let go. Take care of yourself, I whispered, turning away before she opened her eyes. She will live. But the words were empty, as I knew that my life was over. Without her, I would only exist until the day she died. Then I would cease to exist, and there would be peace. There had to be peace. Without looking back, I ran as fast as I could. Each step tore at my flesh, ripping another small piece of my heart away and leaving it behind me. In 3 of her heartbeats, I was standing next to my car. I listened for her footsteps to cross the lawn, but heard a much more disturbing sound, the fading rustle of leaves. She was trying to follow me. Bella, don't try and find me. My eyes turned toward the trees again, my legs begging me to go find her. But with all the strength I could muster, I turned the opposite direction and ran into her house. I found a piece of paper and quickly scribbled a note, mimicking her unique handwriting and telling Charlie where to find her in case she got lost. I glanced at the clock as I set the note by the phone. He would be home in minutes to watch the early game. She couldn't go far. He would make sure she was safe. As I returned to my car, I heard her again, still walking through the greenery. There was nothing left inside me now, except pain, and with every sound, it deepened. If I stayed another second, I wouldn't be able to stand it. I would go to her, and once she was within my grasp, I would never let her go. Quickly, I got behind the wheel, barely seeing the road as I drove away for the last time. Her scent clung to the interior of the Volvo, creating a ghostly vision that beckoned me from the passenger seat, begging me to return. Blindly, I headed out of town. As the minds of the drivers around me buzzed in the back of my head, I turned off the main road and into the forest. Unaware of exactly where I was, I pulled over, unable to take the torture any longer. That last glimpse of her face, with her eyes gently closed, was permanently etched into my eyelids, and every time I blinked, it appeared before me. There could be no agony worse than this. But there could be, I reminded myself. Another image filled my mind, one of blood mixed with Bella's beautiful hair, surrounding her broken body. Not a nightmare, a memory. Too many times her life had been endangered by me, by being exposed to my world. It was just a matter of time before she would be injured again, probably fatally. Then she would be gone forever, and it would be my fault. The pain of that thought brought my hands up to my face as my chest was slashed open and everything inside vanished. As empty as leaving her left me, the idea of her dying literally erased my existence. I forced myself to breathe, to calm down, but the sensation was now permanent. At least without me, she would live. She would enjoy a human life, and it would end someday in a human death. Then she would find the paradise I would never see. She will forget me, I thought, and the pain only increased. The look in her eyes, the easy acceptance of my rejection, ripped me again. How could she believe that I could just leave her? I was so prepared for her to fight, to beg, to make it impossible for me to leave, that I was shocked when she didn't. Her love had changed me in innumerable ways. I had assumed that it was the same for her. Had I been wrong all this time? I tried to breathe, but couldn't. Every thought that crossed my mind only caused more hurt. Even as I tried to think about how much better off Bella was, without the danger my world posed, I found no comfort. As she moved forward with her life, mine ceased. There was nothing for me now. Nothing. The silent torture was broken by the vibration of my phone lying in the cup holder. I lowered my hands and picked it up, trying to decide if this was really a distraction or if it would only amplify the pain. Finally, I looked at the caller ID, expecting it to be Alice. I was mildly surprised that it wasn't. "Yes, Carlyle," I said softly. My breath was ragged as I fought to get enough air to speak. "You've spoken to her," he said, matching my tone. He fell silent, waiting. "Yes," I sobbed, tearlessly. How such a small word could carry so much sadness. My throat closed, and I couldn't speak anymore. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't see anymore. "Stay where you are," he said, and the line went dead. Alice had told him where I was. My hand moved to the key, preparing to go, but I still hadn't found my senses. Part of me longed for my father's company, just for a little while, but my pain was not his, nor should it be. Slowly I managed a breath. He deserved a real goodbye. I straightened up and rubbed my face, trying to erase some of the sadness. My emotions could not be locked away again. Bella had the only part of me that allowed that, my heart. "Please wait, Edward, we are almost there," Carlyle's thoughts intruded. "Please, Edward," and Esme's. My head fell against the steering wheel at the thought of facing my mother. She would be nearly as hard to say goodbye to as Bella. Again I reached for the key, trying to find the strength to run from them, but by that time a familiar black car pulled behind mine and stopped. I forced another uneven breath, then grabbed the black leather bag next to me and deliberately opened my door. The ghost of Bella smiled at me, sitting next to the letter I'd promised to mail. The apparition remained in the car when I got out. I stood, waiting, my eyes glued to the ground. Esme reached me first, not allowing me to take even a step toward her. She wrapped her arms around me and put her head on my chest. "I'm sorry, Edward. We love you. Please don't go." The thoughts repeated over and over in her mind as she held me tight. I loved her so much, my mother, and I returned her hug, resting my cheek against her hair. "You know I have to go. I'll keep in touch, I promise," I whispered. She shook her head and didn't move. I finally dropped my arms, but she refused to let go, and I was afraid that I would have to repeat the scene I just suffered through with Bella. Thankfully, Carlyle interceded. "Esme, we have to let Edward choose his own path," he said gently, as he broke her hold on me. His thoughts carefully mirrored his words, though there was something more. Esme finally released me, but then pulled my face down to hers and kissed me on the cheek. "Remember that we love you, too. Please come home soon," she begged. "I love you, Mom," I said hoarsely. I glanced in her eyes for a moment, but when my lip began to tremble, I turned away, staring into the darkening trees. She stepped back, and Carlyle held her for a moment, trying to comfort her without betraying his own sadness. Esme then trudged back to the car, and I reluctantly looked at my father. "I must ask you one last time, is this the only way?" He studied my face, unable to hide his own sadness any longer. I tried to swallow the lump that filled my throat. He meant the words only as a confirmation, yet they hit me hard, tempting me again. One more opportunity to turn back. "Yes, it is," I said firmly, looking away again. The temptation increased as Carlyle remembered Alice's description of the vision that no longer existed, and the image I'd seen in her mind returned. I had my arms wrapped around a white-clad Bella as I leaned down to kiss her, a future that Alice still believed in. In my mind, the white transformed into the soft pile carpet in what used to be my home, and the red of her lips became a bloody pool surrounding her creamy skin. I set my jaw at the sight. Alice's version of the future was far from perfect, and there would be no more mistakes. "A lot can happen between now and then," I snapped, as my eyes came up to meet his. Regret filled me immediately. "I'm sorry, Carlyle. It has to be this way. I love her too much, and the danger is too great. Please understand," I thought. I inhaled again, but the breath did not fill me. Suddenly I remembered that my hand wasn't empty. "There's one thing you could do for me, though." I held out my keys. "Could you please mail the card in the front seat? It's a letter from Bella, to her mother." My throat closed on her name, as the sound of it speared me. Carlyle carefully took the keys with a nod. He gazed into my face, worried. "Where will you go? Our family is incomplete without you, Edward." My sadness was now mirrored in his eyes, and drove the pain into my chest again. I couldn't stay and torture them, too. "I'm going to kill Victoria." The name changed part of the sadness to hate, as I saw the redhead's face flash through my mother's mind. She was listening intently to my every word. She cannot be allowed to pose a threat to anyone, let alone Bella. Carlyle studied my expression and briefly considered offering to come with me. Before I could protest, he thought of Esme and changed his mind. He put his hands on my shoulders. "Be safe, son. I love you," he thought, as he then put his arms around me and hugged me goodbye. My voice came out as a croak. "I love you too, Dad." He stepped back, and without another glance, I turned and ran into the forest. Both Carlyle and Esme's thoughts were filled with sadness and love as they watched me disappear. The cold, moist air whipped through my hair as I ran, but it did nothing to calm me. It only reminded me of the empty maw that was my chest. Unable to cry, unable to sleep, unable to forget, now I knew that I was truly damned. Only one thought could distract me, and as the trees blurred around me, the words I'd seen on my computer screen briefly obscured the image of Bella in my mind. "Hiker found mauled on trail near Billings," screamed the headline. Victoria was hunting.